Okay, some of you have already heard me for 1 hour and come back for more. So my aim is that I will do a little bit of talking, but hopefully other people will also do talking. Before I start, as you know, I'm a scientist and a practicing psychiatrist. How many of you do research and clinical, both now? Okay, quite a lot of you. How many do just clinical? Quite a few, good, okay. So when I give talks, usually they're mainly clinicians, but I will try and make a balance. These are my disclosures. So I hope this will precipitate a bit of discussion, and I'm going to start, this is a very strange way, you might think, is to give my life story, because I think it may hopefully help some of you think about how you're going to balance research and clinical, and I may just stop after this. I might then just tell you a little bit about why it's important to do research, even if your main job, 90% I think for a lot of you, is clinical work, why we should do research. And if you want, have got a few slides, but it may not be applicable to you. But in the UK, many European countries at least, the academics sit in the universities, and the people who are seeing the patients sit in the clinics, and the academics say, how can we get everyone to do research? So I've also put there, but maybe this is not an issue at all in Turkey, but I'll leave it, but I can do it if you say this is also an issue in Turkey. So, I'm going to give you my life story. Now you're going to know how old I am, but if you go back to 1985, and I qualified in medicine, and did I know then I was going to be a professor? No. So when I graduated, I liked pediatrics. I thought maybe I'll do pediatrics, but I didn't like the neonatology, the small babies. So then I got some taste in medical school in child and adolescent psychiatry. I thought, I think this is what I like. So I'm going to become a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And research, I had no experience in medical school. So I didn't really know what that is. Maybe, I don't know what about medical schools in Turkey? Would you get lots of research experience doing research? No, okay. I think already we have so much to learn at medical school. It's difficult, most countries, to get research experience. So I was just doing clinical practice, training. I followed my husband everywhere, so I was not very career-centric. He was training also in medicine. I followed where he went. And my first exposure to research was 1988-89. And I just want to highlight, and some of you here will be senior, what an important role senior people play. Because, this gentleman, Peter McGuffin, was professor of psychiatry. He was young at the time, he was in his 30s. Unfortunately, he died a few months ago. But he came from London to Cardiff, and he established a really thriving psychiatric genetics and research department in Cardiff. And I was a clinical training in psychiatry. And he made it. His wife was also an academic psychiatrist, and that, I think, for me, was important because this was a husband and wife. She was a woman, they had children, and they're very enthusiastic about research. In fact, sometimes the children would come into the department in the holidays. It seemed like fun. It really felt interesting to think about what we were doing in clinical practice. And as a clinician, I had never known how to do statistics. Again, in medical school, unlike, say, somebody who's done a psychology degree, do we get trained how to do lots of statistics? No. But he was very helpful giving training there. And then I went to do a PhD. Then he said, why don't you apply to do a PhD? So this was really the first taste of doing a PhD. He was not a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He was an adult psychiatrist, and he was actually a geneticist. I really didn't feel very interested in genetics, but he said, never mind, you can work on families. You child psychiatrists are interested in families. So actually my first research was twin studies. And he said, but you need some child psychiatry. So every so often I had to go to see Michael Rutter for supervision in child and adolescent psychiatry. I should say, because some of you here, men and women, I won't say, because men take a very active role with children, but I had children during my PhD, so it took me quite a long time because I had time off, then I went part-time, and I went back, but I finished my PhD. And then when I finished my PhD, there was no job in academic child psychiatry in Cardiff. So Michael Rutter in London said, you need to move. And that was very difficult for me to move because I had in Cardiff, I had my parents nearby, had children. I didn't really want to move, but there was no academic department. And they said, Mike Rutter said, you can never really, unless you get the experience, so either London, Manchester. I didn't go to London because there was also a post for my husband in Manchester, so we moved to Manchester. And the late Richard Harrington was the head of department in child and adolescent psychiatry. I did 4 years, 3.5 years there, and then they got me back to Cardiff, which was great because I had 2 small children, and then I had grandparents to help with the children. So I came back in 1999, and I became the first professor of child and adolescent psychiatry. There was one person, there was only me at that time, 2 small children. But now we have, and the person who was my first PhD student, she is now a professor and a leader, Frances Rice. But gradually I grew up, if you like, a lot of trainees, like the same way I've seen so many of you are trainees, clinical and non-clinical, and now we're a large centre, £10 million, at least more than 30 people looking at children's mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders. So, yeah, but I just wanted to give you the story that I thought I'll just be a clinician, and I like children, so I thought it'd be quite nice to find, have children as well. So, right. Why do research if you're a full-time clinician? And then I'm going to open up the floor. I think it's really important for you as a person. You have some of you, you mainly look young, but everyone maybe looks young to me now. But I think it's really important even if you're just totally dedicated to clinical work and everything. Clinical work is so busy, but it makes you learn to appreciate research methods, to be critical of that evidence when you're reading new papers about this is what you should do in your clinical practice. Even if you're not doing it yourself, you need to know and be, I don't think that study is very good. I don't think that is a good thing. And to be inquiring constantly what you're doing, because how you're practicing today will not be the same in 20 years. So when I trained in child and adolescent psychiatry, how it's practiced today is hardly anything similar. It's really, because I've been in the field so long. So you really you have to keep changing and developing an inquiring approach. You need to keep introducing innovation. It's important for you, not just for your patients. It's really boring if you're doing the same job the same way for 30 years. And you're all really intelligent, you'll get really bored. So you need innovation. It's going to keep you interested in clinical work. And actually, all those years in medical school, you had a really strong scientific training. It's using your scientific background. Sometimes we forget because obviously so much is clinical. We try and get people who are doing full-time clinical to come and do some time with us, even if it's one morning a week. And senior people who have said, I'm too busy, but just they try and get a bit. And this is what they say. It's so wonderful to have a change from my routine work. It keeps my brain active, and it just helps keep perspective. I'm just seeing clinic after clinic after clinic. It gives me perspective. Now, it's interesting for me. I think it's different in Turkey. In the UK, quite a lot of academics, nearly all our work is research and just much less clinical. But for me, then, the clinical gives me perspective because it gives a bit of variety from the main job as university. And it can be fun. Sometimes, maybe this isn't applied to you, but so many of my trainees say, oh no, I'm not a born researcher. And and I kind of laugh because I was not a born researcher, but you can learn and become really interested. And I think also the really good thing, if you're a psychiatrist and a child and adolescent psychiatrist, we generally like working as a team. It's not a solitary, you're usually working in a team. Research is very much about team working, and it just keeps you interested. We've all chosen to do our field because we really care about our patients, and it's really important for, therefore, the services, because lots of research has shown that in a service, the clinical service where research is happening, they have much better performance, not so relevant to us, but reduced patient mortality, much more confidence of the patients, better informed patients, keeping more staff, and that's really important because, again, in the UK at the moment, a big problem is burnout, people feeling very stressed after many years of clinical work. And I think this, that this is really important if it can keep people working for longer as well. And it's important for our field. We all feel passionately about psychiatry. We chose it. So it enhances knowledge and standard of care in psychiatry or child and adolescent psychiatry. Research, if you look at research, I mean, I have two brothers, both are medical. One is surgeon and one is a general medicine. So much more research is done there than in our field. But how is it going to get done unless we do it? So it's really important for our field. And actually you might think, well, there's so many non-clinicians. We have, certainly in our group, we have bioscientists, neuroscientists, psychologists. But you actually have a unique, and sometimes people say, oh, I know so little compared to them. And I said, no, you've got a really unique clinical perspective and a way of asking questions and thinking about questions that non-clinicians don't have. And you can work together very fruitfully to produce research that is relevant to your context. That's, of course, this is another important thing. You might think, oh, all the research is done in the United States. But it can't be. It's a different context. I mean, our context is very different. Our clinical context, our healthcare at the moment is freely provided. It's very different. We don't charge patients. Turkey, it will be getting different. Culture, I mean, a big issue in the UK now is it's much more diverse. It makes it very interesting. But of course, we have to be much more. It's constantly changing. But so you have to have research that's relevant to your context. And you also have to, I mean, the biggest thing for us, we're a medical school, is we get so many medical students coming through doing research, and then they become inspired to do child psychiatry. So that's good. As I said, we have to do young for the people we see, because mental health research really lags behind. So, and actually, how many patients in your clinics get to participate in research? Put your hands up if it's every single person. Nobody. Okay, one person. Okay, in a cancer clinic, it would be nearly everyone. Very few people in psychiatry anywhere in the world get to participate in research. And this is, I mean, I apologise, these are UK figures, but I don't have the relevant figures for every country. But you can see that even, I think the UK spends quite a lot on research, but compared to, say, cancer, for every patient we see with a mental health problem, less than £10, which for a rich country like the UK is a really small amount. So it becomes a vicious cycle. You know, our clinical practice doesn't change. Few people do research, not much research gets done, not much funding, it becomes a vicious cycle. And of course, cancer used to be untreatable. When I was a medical student, hardly any treatments, and it's changed. And this is like the charity giving. Again, in the UK, we do have some charities, but very little compared to cancer and heart disease. Now, again, I don't know, do you have many charities in Turkey giving research funding for mental health? No. And yet I know the Turkish history is one of great compassion to mental health. You'd think that maybe there would, but I mean, that's globally. So, I am going to just finish with a little bit about what clinicians can do, and then I will stop. So, these are NHS clinicians. The NHS is the free service in the UK, but anyone who's a clinician, I'm just giving an example of what they've done. They're people who are training, and they come and just get a taste of research. They come and just spend a little bit of time with our group, maybe, one morning a week through their training, and they work with some of the other group, and they they do something looking at outcome data. There's some people who come and spend 1 year with me, they will do more. They will write a paper or something. You, I know, have to do research. In the UK, you don't have to. Then there are people who've done a PhD, a few who've analysed data. What about if you're, again, I don't know, how many of you are working outside a city where there isn't a university? Do any of you work in areas where there's no university? One person. Because, that is true in all countries. It's really difficult. There might not be academic child and adolescent psychiatrists or big academic department just down your road. But maybe that, these days you can link remotely with anyone, anywhere in the world. You've also got academics in related fields like social science, psychology. So what are your options? I think, again, I understand you have to do some research, but what about when you finish? What about just joining some ongoing research, or do something small yourself? Or some of you, I guess, will, or maybe all of you, I don't know, will do a PhD. Does it have to be pure research? It doesn't. It can be just a quality initiative to improve your delivery, like once you start, you're fully trained. This is the one thing I think I'd really like to highlight, because again, clinicians never want to publish. They say university academics do that. But I think it's really important, because if you've done something in Istanbul, how on earth is your colleague somewhere else going to know? Somewhere else in Turkey. How on earth do you know somebody in another country where it will be really relevant? They won't know unless you publish and disseminate your findings. And I think the other thing, it's not just important for others to learn, but you want it to be scientifically rigorous. Now, what we do in our team is that any planned research and any planned papers gets critically reviewed by several people in the group before it goes out. But of course, if you go to a journal, you might just start all thinking the same, so you're not very critical. If it goes to a journal, then you're really having some sort of international standard. Somebody who's doesn't think, who's hopefully impartial, will mean that your research. And I think that's important for Turkey as well as you as clinicians, that your research is, they're also there internationally. And I think the common pitfalls for clinicians is being ambitious. I mean, researchers, academics, psychiatrists do spend nearly all their time, lots of time doing research. The other thing I just want to say, I don't know whether it's an issue here in Turkey, but in the UK, we have a predominance at the moment of women, not all, but psychiatry, and they say, I can't, my children are really small, I haven't got enough time. But it's another thing to think about when I'm doing my clinical work. But children grow up, you have a very long working career, just if you're training, get a range of skills, and you, as I said, they grow up and you will have other time. And you don't have to do it on your own. I think it's very difficult. You might not have enough time to do something all on your own. But what about a group of 3 or 4 of you working with someone? Maybe you do all these things, but I'm going to leave it there, because I think as senior clinicians you do a lot. So keep it as Q&A now. So maybe you all do research. And maybe you don't. And what sorts of research do you do? We do a huge range of research in our department of child psychiatry. So we have a big group for depression. So we do epidemiology. We're quite lucky in the UK. We've got large epidemiological cohorts. We also do quite a lot of genetics. We also have currently some interventions. We're doing a 2-generation study of depression where we treat the parent and we're putting in a prevention to the child, because we know that things run in families. What are you going to do about it? So putting in a 2-generation intervention. We're also doing work in schools on school mental health. We have colleagues who are social scientists, and we work with them because they collect data on every pupil in Wales on their mental health and put in different interventions into schools for mental health. And then, again, we're quite lucky in Wales, all the health records are digitalised, so somebody's also looking at depression outcomes in children. And then we also have a lot of research on ADHD. Current projects include people who've got ADHD and become depressed, and then the other thing is females with ADHD. It's quantitative and qualitative. So we have biology, epidemiology, intervention, quantitative, qualitative. So yeah, I'd be interested to know, how are you managing your research? What sorts of research are you doing? What are the problems that you encounter doing research? What are the challenges you think? I was told this should be mainly interactive.